In this lesson, we're going to learn how to find out the values that a node is outputting, as well as how to test conditions and how to use them inside of our ice tree. By using conditionals, we can gain a great amount of control over our ice particles. So here's where we left off, and you can open up 15 strands end. So let's jump in to our point cloud here. Let's go into its ice tree, and let's take a look at what we have. So right now we're doing quite a few things inside of our ice tree, and so far everything's working quite well. However, most of the time when we're working with ice, we don't get the right result the first time around. So there's a lot of different ways we can use to preview the results of our changes. Now the first is obviously just connecting these up and seeing what effect they have. However, sometimes that will not work when we're working with more complex nodes. So what another tool we have to help us is the show values. So let's take a look at this randomize around value. Now let's say we were having some troubles with this, so we wanted to see what value this was actually spitting out per particle. So we can see if there are either any strange values like 0 or a negative value, or values that are too large. Well, we can simply right-click any connection and go to Show Values. What this will do now is it'll bring up a little dialog box that lets us set how these values will be displayed, but most of the time we can just click OK. And of course, since we made a change to our ice tree, we'll need to hit play to view it. And now we can see the actual number that this randomize around value is creating per particle. Now you'll see we have a little V icon over this line that tells us that we're viewing its values. So now we can zoom in and take a look at these values on a per particle basis. And again, this is really helpful whenever we're looking for a problem or trying to figure out why something is or is not working. Now of course this is going to slow down our simulation a little bit because it has to do a lot of display, but these are not rendered and they're only in our viewport for our use. So if you're troubleshooting, I definitely would use this functionality, but if you're just working, keeping this functionality on can slow down your simulation by quite a bit. So what you can do is simply right-click and hide values, and then they will disappear and your simulation will run at its normal speed. So now that we know how to see the output of nodes, or the values that they're bringing, let's figure out how to find out if these particles are inside of this surface. So again, let's just look for surface. So we have quite a few different nodes, and we're looking for something that tests something, because that will give us back a value we can use. It'll give us back a on or off, yes or no value. So we have a collision with a surface, which would be helpful if we wanted to make sparks. However, because these are not currently colliding, the collision tester will not help us. What we're looking for is a test distance to surface. So let's drag this in here. Of course, it's going to be red because we need to plug in a surface. So what we can do is we can plug in the second beaker. So you can plug a node into multiple different outputs. So we can grab the get beaker 2, which is the second beaker, and plug its value into our surface. So now this one node is plugging data or piping data into two separate nodes. So as you can see, this can get a little bit messy, but it gives us a great amount of control and lets us easily and quickly switch things. For example, if we change to have another beaker, we could simply come into this one node and change its value, instead of having to find every copy of this node. Now, of course, we could copy and paste this node and have two copies of this get beaker 2 node, and it would have the same effect. So now let's take a look at our test distance to surface. So we have a result which is orange, which means it's a Boolean, or in other words, it's either on or off, and we have a location. So we want to test if this test distance to surface is working. So I usually do this by plugging it in to something and doing a show values. Now for this to work, we're going to need to plug it into our ice tree. So we can either find something that currently has a port and plug it in there, or create a new node that will help us connect this into the ice tree. And let's just grab an if node. So let's clear our search here, and let's go into the tool, and let's go to execution. This will help us or let us change things depending on these test cases. So let's grab an if, and we can just plug the conditional into our result here, and then plug the result into our ice tree. And of course, we want to plug this above our simulate particles, so let's plug our result into this port 6 here. Okay, so now we have our test distance to surface plugged through an if node that is plugged into our ice tree. So let's right click, show values, and click OK, and now let's hit play. Now you'll notice that nothing is happening. That's because our if node is currently not actually doing anything. So we need to connect something into the if node to sort of prime it for working. So one of the things we're going to do when we get to beaker 2 is we want the particles to kind of slow down and settle. So what we can do is we can simply add another gravity force to them. So let's scroll up in our ice tree and find our gravity. And since our gravity force was disconnected, we can look for the add forces node. Actually seems like I'm getting a little bit of a display error here, so let me just close my ice tree and bring it back up. And actually I think my emitter here is covering up my gravity and my add forces, so if you ever need to quickly and easily find or rearrange all your nodes, you can just hit Control R, and that will auto arrange all of these nodes. So let's select our gravity force and our add forces nodes, hit Control C. Let's come down here to the if now, hit Control V to paste these in, and let's connect our add forces up to the if true. And now let's play this back, and now we can see the values that are being output from our test distance to surface. Now you'll notice that all of these values are 0, which means false. So something inside of this test distance to surface is not evaluating correctly. So let's double click this and take a look. Now you'll notice we have a test distance and a cutoff distance. Now currently the test distance is set at 0.1. Now if you'll recall, in a much earlier lesson, we set our bounce off surface to have a offset of about 0.6. So a test distance of 0.1 will never evaluate to true because it's always, or these particles will never get that close. So let's set both of these to something like 1. And let's play this back again. Let's just see if this will work better for our particles. So now we can see that the particle value changes to 1 as soon as it's inside of this second beaker. So now we have a great amount of control over the particles in this beaker because we can now change them depending on if they're in the beaker or if they're not. So in the next lesson, we'll continue adding to this test distance to surface and our if statement here to continue changing these once they get into the second beaker. So in this lesson, we covered quite a bit of ground. We learned how to right-click on any of these paths and choose a show values, which will give us the usually numeric information that is being output from this node, which really helps us when we're trying to find if something is working or not. We also used an if node to plug this condition into our ice tree. So in the next lesson, we'll begin exploring what we can do with this newfound functionality.